Good morning, fellas, and welcome to the moot house, the kind of moot house, the hybrid meeting. I don't know what we call it. But anyway, we're in John's gospel and we're learning every week. We're picking up more about how to make more of a successful hybrid meeting, and so thanks for your participation in this. We'll just jump right in. Whoop, I hit the wrong screen. Last time, we're in chapter 9, and what I made a statement last week: when all is lost, according to Jesus, all is not lost, and that is really our hope in the good news, the gospel. That that is absolutely true. What this study has been teaching me, and I am just blown away by it, is just how biased I see the people are and how biased I have been. I'm in a big learning mode right now, and it's really been fun to see the disconnect between Jesus and these people, and I see me, and we'll be able to talk more about the us, not me. It's not about me, but I find it just absolutely fascinating. This disconnect between what we see Jesus talking about and demonstrating, and the people, the audience, those present. We see two very different positions, and I think you guys are certainly aware of that. And here they're stated. There's some who perceive Jesus as an empathizing equal. And now we're talking about the others, the crowd at this point. And this is all reviewed from last week. And then there are others who perceive Jesus as having the ability to do something, to intervene. And the question is, why did he not intervene in the death of his friend? And so that's kind of where we left it last week. We talked about our human inclination, about expectations, and these expectations are derived from how you and I think things ought to be. That is what I have found so fascinating, and we'll be talking, going in and out of that idea in the study. So in verse 38 we pick up, and it says, I've got to, geez. So Jesus, again, being deeply moved within, came to the tomb. Now it was a cave. The tomb was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And I think you guys kind of have that image of what that would look like. Jesus said, "Remove the stone." And then Martha comes back immediately and says to him, "Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he's been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did not I say to you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" And then in verse 41, so they removed the stone, and Jesus raised his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me, but I knew that you always hear me. Nevertheless, because of the people standing by around, I said it, so that they may believe that you sent me." And when he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." Or that's the King James. Kind of an aside here, it brought memories. Back in my early Christian life, I was in my 20s, that I belonged to a denomination where the thing is that you get opportunity to tell your story, which they called a testimony, in front of a group. And I remember I was asked to do that, and I chose this passage to speak from. And when I worked for weeks on it, so afraid that I was going to make a mistake, so self-conscious. And when I was done with it, I said, I will never do that again. That's amazing. Lazarus, come forth. I remember standing on the platform saying that. Lazarus, come out. Out came the man who had died, and he was bound hand and foot with wrappings, and his face was wrapped around with a cloth. And Jesus said, unbind him and let him go. I love that last phrase, unbind him and let him go. Certainly applicable at the moment, but I think it's the heart of God through Jesus Christ to unbind us all and let us go. So anyway, let's move on. So let's work through it. Jesus came again, being deeply moved within. He came to the tomb. And we read about the stone. Jesus said, remove the stone. Martha's rebuttal, talking about the death of her brother. Martha's operating, thinking, if you will, from her all is lost perspective. In her mind, it's over. It's gone. And from that perspective, she's pointing out to Jesus the realities of death. And she reminds Jesus that after 4 days, decomposition of the body will be present, resulting in a horrible stench. See where her mind is. After everything Jesus has told her, this is where her mind is. This is where my mind would have been. Verse 40, Jesus said to her, did I not say to you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? And, we looked at that a few weeks ago where he says, I can't remember the exact quote, but he who believes in me will never die. And then he turns to Martha and says, do you believe this? And he states that you'll see the glory of God, the presence of God. Jesus responds first with a reminder, followed by a promise. The reminder, I've then wrote a short paragraph on each reminder, I think. Everything inside Martha is shouting it's over. This threshold of death has been crossed. There's no turning back in her mind. There's no alternative. And it's only natural for her to respond this way. It's absolutely natural. While in this state of mind, Jesus reminds her of what he has said previously about death, and more importantly, about belief. Dave, good morning, Dave. You just joined in. I didn't see you join. It's good to have you. And you got your yellow palm up there. So what do you got there for us?
Just simply to suggest that Martha is practicing stinking thinking.
And Dave, I couldn't hear that.
Martha is practicing stinking thinking.
What do you say?
Stinking thinking.
Oh, that's cute. That's a Dave Brown anthem.
Yes.
Thanks, Dave.
Well,
Go ahead.
It's interesting when he says, did I not say? There's sort of a sense that I suppose it's pretty good of us to constantly be reading the Bible, remember, because we'll be going through life and we forget. And I think we count on Jesus to say, did you not read? Remind us that, there's a lot more to it than we remember. So I kind of hope Jesus is sitting there on the side of my head. Sometimes if I'm at a pickle, he says, Bill, did you not read such and such? I go, oh yeah, thank you for reminding me of that.
All righty. Let's thanks, Bill. And then the promise, he reminds her of a prior conversation they just had. And then Jesus gives her a promise. The glory of God is generally thought, and you'll see the glory of God, and the glory of God is generally thought of as the presence of God. That's how I see it. Which is, and there could certainly be much more to it, which is the reality. This is how I see it, and I say this a lot. The glory of God, the presence of God, is the reality of that which is actually true. See, I keep going back to this idea, fellas, that I think the kingdom, God's reality, is what is actually true. And I think the propensity of us human beings is to create our own reality, which is in somewhat alignment with that, but it's filtered by our own biases, fears, ways of thinking that are subpar to what is really the truth. Jesus keeps talking about the truth. So that's the grid by which I'm looking at this entire study. She was familiar with this term from her experience with the biblical text and within her tradition. That is the glory of God. She was familiar with that. But here, within her real life tragedy, this is happening right now in real time at the death of her brother. This encounter is promised to her personally. It takes it out of the classroom, out of the Bible reading, the quiet time, and it's in real life situation that is tragic. And Jesus is promising her at this moment that the glory of God is going to be present to her. And I think that's really important. According to Jesus, Martha will witness an act of God, which is the word of God. It's God acting. We say God speaking, God present, God with them in their moment. And I think that is absolutely true. And that is so much a part of our hope. Faith is being required of Martha at this moment to be demonstrated through the act of removing the stone. Everything inside of her is pushing back. Well, he's been dead 4 days. His body is going to be stinking. And he says, did I not tell you? And so she, by faith, is there. I don't know if she physically removed the stone. I think that's not important. But the people there, and she's engaged in that, remove the stone, and it is resulting in a promise of a new kind of seeing right here, right now. The act of faith needed to happen. The removal of the stone needed to happen in order for Lazarus to come out and for them to see the glory of God, God's act at that moment. So they removed the stone. Jesus raised his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me, but I knew that you always hear me. Nevertheless, because of the people standing around, I said it. Reason so that they may believe that, here's that key phrase I think we're going to talk about. You sent me. 3 words. You sent me. Those present removed the stone, even though the general consensus was, what difference is this going to make? Because they're all coming from the perspective of all is lost. This act in itself demonstrates faith, and I put here a similar comment: obedience to the word of God. They're responding to God, they're responding to the word of God, which is, of course, Jesus. This act is then followed by a prayer verbalized by Jesus. His prayer is one of thankful acknowledgement of what has always been true. His prayer is unique to him because he is the only human who can state that I knew that you always hear me. That's not true of me. And my guess is it's not true of you. Neither is it true of any human being outside of Jesus. He's unique. And everything he did is in presence in relation to his relationship with the Father.
Why do you say that's not true of us? Is it, does God hear us and we don't know it or believe it? Or is you say we don't believe it or God doesn't hear
I
us?
don't think we believe it.
Gotcha.
Because I think we are so self-biased by our own way of thinking.
Okay.
Jesus demonstrates what it actually is to be free from all of that. That's how I do it.
Gotcha. Thank you.
That's why, he says, he has said everything is about his relationship with the Father.
Right.
That we have not experienced because there's so many other things floating around in our heads. And I think he demonstrates to us what that looks
And
like.
he seems to always be surprised at that. Martha, don't you believe it?
Yeah,
Why
yeah.
do you ask? He seems to always be surprised that everybody else doesn't recognize that.
And I think that is part of what intrigues me. It's like apples and oranges.
Yeah.
And to me, it shows the state of how I think in relation to what is actually true.
So the question is, does Jesus not get that? That we don't get, does he not get that we don't get it?
Yeah, what does Jesus get and what he doesn't get? That's a big question. I don't know the answer to that. There's an intercessory portion of his prayer as well, in that his pending action will be to bring others to believe. Everything about Jesus within this book is about bringing people to believe. It's about invitation to life right here and right now. This belief is to be experienced by the people through the embracing of something entirely new. One more line, and that something is that you sent me.
And I-
That's the segue into the next verse.
That line disappears off the screen.
It does.
Yeah.
The bottom one?
The last line I see here is entirely
How
new.
about that? You see it now?
That's something
Yeah.
you sent me. I see that now.
You can see it now.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's the technical, I just moved my screen here.
okay.
Yeah, Here's the same verse. And let's continue with our comment. Let's talk about you sent me. How do we understand this? You sent me. Okay, I'm going to make a statement here, a stab, and then this might be, we can enter into our discussion. For years, I believe that the whole idea of Jesus was to convince them, the people, that he was God's savior, and that through belief you receive the right to become go to heaven. I mean, that is the four spiritual laws, and so I filtered everything through that, and I think a lot of that was induced from how I was taught, and I'm not critical of it, but I don't think I think that really falls short. And here it says, one common view is that Jesus is hoping that through his action, others will be convinced that his deity, and therefore listen to what he's saying, resulting in a kind of a joining the right team. And I think this idea falls short. That is how I looked at a passage like this for years and years and years, is that Jesus's presence is to try to convince them into a right formulation of that he's from God. I think that's part of it, but I think to leave it there really falls short. I think Jesus is inviting them into something wonderful right now. And here it is. Rather, Jesus's presence is an invitation for all to enter into and participate with something wonderfully different. And again, I keep saying this right here and right now. It's not right here and right now. This something is to be entered and become part of the human experience from here on out. The "you sent me" in the most simplest language could be the call to come home to what is actually true. Elsewhere, I would equate this idea to the kingdom of God. There is a wandering. There's a natural wandering demonstrated by us human beings because of what we create in our own heads. And I think that this "you sent me" is a call, is a type of a call home to what actually exists. But in order to come home, one must let go of what has been personally created, that which one thinks is true. And this is a demonstration of belief when we can let go of that. Here's that verse again, and I'm not going to read it because we read it like 3 times. Jesus's intent through his action is that the people present will embrace the reality that the human being standing before them, Jesus, is what God looks like within human flesh. His offering to those present, John's offering to the first century church, and the offering to all others throughout all time is to follow him. He has engaged death right here and is about to perform resurrection. He will soon engage his own death and will be personally resurrected. And what I've often said, with every death, there is a resurrection. One more line. Because of him, as you and I engage death daily, the promise of resurrection is absolutely true. Same thing, is that he's showing us something here. Here's a slide that we've looked at, and it shows the human predicament, our fallenness. And I call it the convoluted human condition, the all is lost, the grief zone, all of the tragedy that and the pain and the sorrow that we experience, which is part of life, and the informing of each other's thinking back and forth. And we've already looked at this slide, and within that very midst, in the thick of the pain, it's here that we see Jesus acting right here, right in the core. And in my mind, the gospel writer John placed this segment right at this strategic moment. We're going to actually look at that in the weeks to come, as we look at how he organized this and his intent, which he states in John 20, that it's right here. He's showing us something, this enemy that we call death, he's entering into, and he's performing an act of life within this. And I think that is something to take note of. And here's that verse again. We won't read it. As a result, through his action, that we see there's life. And that life is right here and right now, right before our eyes. So table time. In this session, we've seen the raising of Lazarus, a very familiar story. And within that, we focused in on those three words. You sent me. Let's talk about that and what it means. How do you understand that message of you sent me? I've kind of shared a little bit about my evolution of thought in that. We're not looking for the right answer here, guys. We're all on the journey. We're all well seasoned, and I would love to hear our group's response to that idea that when Jesus said this to the crowd, or he was actually praying. That was part of his prayer. That his intent is that the people present would see him as being sent by God.
Dave had a little statement on his laptop saying eternity is now in session.
In what way do you think your understanding of Jesus's mission has changed? And or in what way has it remained the same? So let's talk about this idea that we see in the text, Jesus's intercessory prayer, you sent me. What are your thoughts?
I think he's trying to. I think all the time he's around, they still see him as a guy, good guy, preaching. I mean, it's sort of like he's always having to provide his bona fides.
He's like,
Having to provide his bona fides. I
Oh.
am who I am. He had to constantly kind of have remind people, I'm different. I mean, he said, you sent me. I mean, that's back. Who gives you the authority to do this? The priest said, where did you get your authority? It's
such a
why should we totally believe you?
Yeah.
Not a few things, but on everything. How can we trust that? And he's trying to just shore up his bona fides.
Yeah.
Because if you're gonna follow somebody, you gotta trust them.
Yeah.
And so
in that invitation, that sense of he's trying to convince them, just believe. What is he hoping for them to do with that?
trust me.
And then this isn't a test.
I know, but I mean, he's trying to convince them to trust him. And when he's gone, we have these four gospels. And each of them have a piece and some of them overlap and all that stuff. But they give us a framework, a picture of Jesus, but they're never intended to be all inclusive. We're to take this, go into the future and trust him. Yeah, this is just a few samples that John, Mark, Matthew, and Luke wanted us to know.
I think there's a little bit of a difference here, Bill, between the first time they asked him, by what authority do you do these things? Because the first time he said, okay, by what authority was John doing his baptisms? And they wouldn't answer, so he didn't answer. The difference between that and this is that he answers. He says, I am, they're asking by what authority am I going to do what I'm going to do? And I'm going to show them, I'm going to tell them, or I'm going to show them this miracle so that they will realize that you sent me. They will realize where my authority comes from. So this time he does answer, by what authority are you doing these things? And he doesn't do it by his words, but he does it by his actions.
Yeah.
And this just not Mary Martha. There's a big crowd here, and a lot of them are Pharisees. I mean, there's an audience at this event.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's an audience. Yeah. Other thoughts.
But they,
Mike, could you actually enlighten how this is different, the way you think from your initial thing with the four spiritual laws? You know, how this, could you expand on, you know, I think you explained it a little bit, but I didn't quite understand what the difference was to you.
Let me take a stab at that, Tati. Thank you for the question. For one, I am not critical of the four spiritual laws or my background or actually that I missed anything. I think it's just part of the journey. But what I was attempting to say was that I, like now, I have a way, whoop,
you're good. You're good.
Mike just froze.
Oh,
yeah, I think.
Yeah, he's frozen.
We hear you, but keep talking.
My battery went out.
okay,
That's-
but
That's another tech, but I'll come over here.
we're hearing you, yeah. Come on, sit where I'm sitting, you see,
Well,
and I'll sit over there.
okay. So, Tati, thank you. And I just had this giant wave of fear. I hope we get this recorded.
It's still working, I think, Mike.
Well, my laptop died.
Well, we still have the screen up, so something's going. And it says it's
Well,
recording.
we're on Bill.
Whoops.
Well, see we just lost the screen, but we still have Bill's session. So I'm going to get back to Tatsi's question. And so I've started out with a bunch of disclaimers. For years and years and years, I viewed the message of the gospel as demonstrated through Jesus, and this text would bear it out, is that these people need to believe that Jesus is God, that they're sinners, and that Jesus is going to go to the cross to die for their sins, to make a payment, and that is required, and that if they just would believe that, they could go to heaven when they die. It was a type of ticket, a type of what he was trying to do is convince them so that they could go to heaven when they died. That was the primary way I would have looked at this and would have projected that into it. I think that really falls short, Tatsi. That's how I viewed it. I'm not saying you guys did, but that's how I viewed it. But I now see it is that Jesus's presence, he's inviting people into a whole nother way of living. And in order for them to do that, they have to let go of how they think. That Jesus is standing before them as God in flesh. And he shows them through his demonstrations, through his words, his actions and words of what God is really like. And that is what is really true. He's showing them what, instead of the shadow, he's showing them what the substance really is. And that everyone present there, and I think all of humanity, is operating out of something that is somewhat of a shadow that we have created, that shadow, and how we filter certain things. I don't think he's asking them to take the ticket at all. I think he's asking them to let go, to trust him, and through trusting him, which I say trust, believe. In order to do that, you really have to let go of your own of our own prescribed ways of thinking. And in no better opportunity. I can't think of a better situation as the raising of someone from the dead. I mean, that is the big league. And here these people were thinking one way jointly. I see you.
Yeah, you're washing out because of the sun behind there.
No,
The sun's shining through here.
we're.
Yeah, is there a blind or something you can close?
Yeah, there is, but we.
Now you're good.
I'm moving the camera.
You're
The
good
sun's
now.
up. So anyway, Totsi, I took a stab at that and I think I finished it up. So on one hand, a ticket, a way to go through a process in order so I can go to heaven and not go to hell. On one hand, that is what really conducted a lot of my beliefs. I'm not critical of that, but I think it really falls short of what the true invitation that we see here in John's gospel, the true invitation of Jesus into life right here and right now. And in order to do that, I have to let go of what I've created in my head in order to believe that. So that's how I would state that.
Can I put two bits in? This is nice to be next to him, like a talk show, My understanding, as best I understand the Anabaptist approach of it, the typical evangelical approach was believe, confess, and receive, and you're in. I mean, you've crossed the threshold and you're supposed to follow, but if you don't, it's okay. But the believing and then how you believe is really kind of subjective. The Anabaptist routine in terms of fellowship was, if you're moving towards Christ, join us. If you're moving away. So in other words, they're saying follow first, and the following you will come to believe. So it's an interesting loop. You believe first and then follow, and you follow and come to believe. Yeah, exactly. But both have a valid position. But I think the problem is with the and I worked really good in Crusade and it works really well, but if a lot of people would believe and think they got their ticket and then just go about their life the way it is. And that was kind of detrimental to the church.
That's where the disconnect is that's where it falls short, is to go through an action one time in life and then you just kind of go on with life.
Right.
That is really missing it.
But
That's why I say it falls short.
yeah, right. That's why the Gospels are there, to show us how to follow Jesus. Here's who he is, he's following. So yeah. It's like a talk show. Now, this is a promo to you guys to come in and be live and sit down, have coffee with us. We're going to be here.
Let me say, on the other side of the fence, we are live, so
Yes, you're right.
technology, right? This is pretty real, so it's all right. I get to see
Yeah,
everybody's facial reactions, and so on the other side of the fence.
Yeah, it's really quite remarkable. Just a side note, John, and I'd like to hear your comments. I remember back in the 70s visiting the local Hewlett-Packard site. I was visiting someone and they brought me into a room and they had created an entire room with giant electronic equipment and cameras and all that. And they had created what we call Zoom today.
Yep.
It was probably $500,000.
Right.
To do that, and we're doing it here for free. Well, we're not for free. I pay a subscription, but
Well, yeah. Well,
but anyway, that's totally outside. So, Totsi, did that help at all? Well, and then we got Dave. So yeah.
The problem, or not the problem I have, but in terms of those, my belief, was but my baptism to me was particularly life-changing, in the sense of I died to my old life of sin, and I was born again into a new life in Christ. And I think rather than just stopping at the particular point of that's my ticket into heaven, I have always tried to say that means my life right now eternally. Okay. So my
Yeah.
present life and my present actions have to reflect that belief and trust. That's why Jesus died, and to keep. So my struggle is always to keep him as a reality in my life, okay, and practice that. But it's a constant battle for me to do that, because I kind of relapse into my own self-centered way of doing that. But I never have had that thing that we learn in the four spiritual laws, that okay, once I do that, I'm going to heaven. I continually have to work on that belief that that's what's going to happen to me, because I still don't really, so I don't really trust. I can think most of that thing that you believe in terms of, Jesus as being really who God sent and is really the Son of God. So I still struggle with that. Okay.
Well, yeah,
That's the way it's supposed to be, though.
Yeah.
You're struggling.
yeah.
Totsy, maybe, aside, which I say example. So are you married?
Yes.
So how many years ago did you get married?
38.
So was it, when you first got married, was it much like the four spiritual law thing? Right? Where you, agreed and you had this covenant and you accepted her, right? But so my question would be, you're married, you're married, but is that relationship something you still have to work at?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for life in the present, as Mike keeps saying, right? It requires an ongoing daily, I don't know, a little bit of work, a little belief, a little, right? To keep the reality of that thing alive.
Mhm. Yeah.
So it is in the past. I think the four spiritual laws, are fine. It's good. It gets you to first base, so to speak, right?
They worked.
Well, yeah, I mean, but it's the beginning of a relationship.
Right.
Right.
I think its biggest failure was it became I like this word, bona fide, that you're in or you're out. And people who grew up in the church and didn't have a transformative event or something like that were always questioned as suspect. And the churches that had altar calls were the more real thing. And it really got a muddy mess in there in terms of who's my brother, who's not my brother. And that's where I think it failed.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's typically what happens with anything new, right? It begins entrepreneurial, and next thing you know, the thing grows up and it becomes an organization, then becomes a company, and then it becomes an institution, and the purpose of the institution is to perpetuate itself. So that's kind of normally how things go if you're not, what should I say, on the alert.
So Jeff, I just realized on my computer that your hand is a yellow hand and yours it's a white hand. And so you got your hand raised. Why don't you talk, Jeff?
Oh, I don't know that I raised my hand, but I did want to talk.
Well, it's your hand is on the screen.
No, I
I
don't
don't
know how
see
that
it.
happened.
I
Okay,
don't see it.
Do you see-
all right.
Yeah, you
Okay,
have
well,
national-
here's what I had to say, and maybe you're gonna get to it later, but Tatsi we're talking about this entering in, or this, hey, now I'm part of the club mentality. Do you think, everybody, that when Lazarus walked out of the grave, he shook Jesus's hand and said thanks and went his own way? He said, now I'm alive. Thanks so much. No, he followed Christ. He fellowshiped with Christ. He stayed in relationship with Christ. And that's the way it is with us. I mean, when we come into when we accept that Christ is who he says he is, which is what he was trying to say a little bit here. We don't say thanks. I'll see you in heaven. We walk with him. We try to daily fellowship with him, and do what he says. So,
Yeah.
how we come about that relationship, as long as we recognize the fact that the source of life that we have right now comes from Christ, then it makes it a whole lot easier to try to fellowship with him, to try to be obedient, to try to do the things that he says in his word. And we don't use it as our ticket to heaven.
Well, it becomes your ticket to heaven, because if you want to be Jesus' friend, he's not going to kick you out. And Dallas Willard's A Divine Conspiracy dwells on that, like Abraham. Well, Abraham was a friend of God. God is happy to have his friends join him.
Yeah, well, and I agree with you. I'm just saying that when you get that ticket, you get on the train. You don't stand there with the ticket and watch the train go by. You become part of that life, or the ticket does you no good.
Well, I'm going to say sometimes you get on the train and found out you got a ticket. You didn't know how you got on. And I mean, there's many ways you come. I'm thinking of the Charles Colson defending his wife, who's an Anglican. Someone said, what was your born again experience? And she never had one, but he said she's a full bona fide Christian. So when did you get your ticket? I don't know.
Yeah, well, and I guess I'm not saying that it's not your ticket. What I'm saying is the ticket, however it gets in your hand, however, whatever your experience is in coming to Christ, it is now a journey you're on. And in what regards to what Tatsi was saying, it is one of those things where you have to realize that, there is something I don't even know I have to do in obedience, not to earn anything, but I have to live a life that shows that I have the ticket. Kind of, I don't know if that's even right, but it's to me, I just look at it as there is such a gratefulness, like that I feel like Lazarus would have had, that there's no way that he would have thought to himself, hey, thanks, I'm alive again. See you in heaven.
I think it had an impact on him.
He would have grabbed onto Jesus and walked with him, the rest of his life.
I think he woke up and wondered. By the way, he didn't walk out of there. I don't know if he floated out or came to the front, but they had to unbind him before he could move.
Dave, I think Dave's got something. Well, I think Dave's got something. But
Yeah, I keep muting because my furnace is really loud right here, and I didn't want all the noise. But through the years, many people in many situations have challenged me with the acronym KISS.
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple, stupid. I think we have all become accustomed and comfortable with scriptures with which we're very familiar. And we get so familiar with them, even when they're so simple and straightforward, that we often tend to miss what they're really saying again. It's just so familiar that it just doesn't have an impact. So one of the ones in the context of our discussion here is I would go to Matthew 6:9. After this manner, Jesus is saying, here's how you pray. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven.
Yeah, there you go.
He's saying that my kingdom, when you get the ticket to use that explanation, which is a good way to look at it. When you get the ticket, you have the ability, you really have the responsibility to walk in the Lord's ways in earth as he does in heaven, not just when you get to heaven.
Yeah.
So it's now and then. So it's a very common, simple phrase, in earth as it is in heaven. And I think it's so simple that we miss sometimes what it's really saying. And it is encouraging us to be in that spirit and that power and that truth now, just as it is,
In heaven.
has been, is, and will be forever in heaven.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Dave. Yeah. Bob, did you have was that
Well,
you?
I've just been thinking, I think we're getting there. Dave kind of summarized it. We live in a world where there are a lot of competing views as to what life is all about. How was it created? Where's truth? What's not true? What's the purpose of life? How long does it live? How long is death real? Is death not real? And I think that what Jesus was trying to say was, and what the kingdom life is all about, which is that transition away from the ticket to living the kingdom life, is to try to start to understand how life was designed by the Creator. What was his intent? What do relationships look like? What does truth look like? What is actual reality? And that when Jesus was in this encounter with Lazarus, it's part of his earthly ministry. He's trying to say, the way of life that I'm trying to demonstrate is what was intended by God and by my Father and me, because he was present at creation. What was intended by in creation to be a life that is what life is all about, and why we were created the way we were. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's
Yeah. Hey, Bob,
yeah.
you just had a very serious operation. Did you
Right.
ever fear that you might die?
I'm really, the answer to that is sure. Yeah. I mean, I had both my kids in here the day or two before I went to the hospital. I showed them, in case I don't survive this, here's where all my business affairs are, my passwords, all that kind of thing. I went through it. I went through my living will. If something happens to me and end up in a vegetative state, this is how I want to be treated. I'd have to say, yes, I did think that was a possibility. I didn't fear it. I would have to say that leading up to the surgery and even after the realization that I'd been diagnosed with cancer, I've lived a life of real solid peace. It's just been amazing to me. I've been very aware that I'm yoked to Christ, and Christ is walking with me, and he's doing the heavy lifting. I just release myself to him. And that's been a real strong way I've been able to go through what the last almost 2 months has been like now.
Huh.
I don't know if that helps you or not. You
I
have to
wanna
remember that I've had anesthesia 4 times to the total of about 6 or 8 hours. Boy, that messes up your mind, your brain at this age, and it's kind of hard to communicate. But anyway, to answer your question.
Yeah, so let me ask you another question, but I'm going to read a couple verses first. So back at 21, Martha says to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Jesus says to her, your brother will rise again. Martha says, I know he'll rise again on the last day. Jesus says to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me shall live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?
Yeah, that's mind-boggling.
Yeah, so exactly. So, when God created, just instituted creation, and we began to try to have all these competing viewpoints. The one that Jesus came to show and to represent was one that was the way life was really, the true way life was created. And there is no death, there's no dying, there's no time, there's nothing. And so I think that was at play also in the way Jesus was interacting when he was with Mary, Martha, and they're asking for Lazarus to raise him. He's saying, haven't you gotten it yet? That I came to conquer death. I'm going to go in about a few days, and I'm going to go conquer death.
He seemed to be, he talked about it. He's asleep. He seems to be saying to all of us is, it looks like you're dying, but you're really going to sleep. I'll wake you up.
He called it sleep.
Yeah, he called it sleep,
It's
and he wakes
really
him
a
up.
different perspective.
Yeah. But you and John are two people I would call dead men walking. They have a sense of it more than we do, because you kiss cancer, or you're kissing cancer all the time.
Yeah, well, I hopefully I'm free of cancer. That's what the doctors say
True.
now.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'm free of that.
One day, all of us are going to be at that door, right?
Yes.
We're all gonna
Exactly.
be. And actually, probably sooner than later. But
It's ticking.
and so this story is so remarkable, right?
Yeah.
It is such an incredible story.
It is.
It's such a setup. I mean, this is all a setup. Jesus set this up very intentionally.
And if I wanted you to believe, I would have interviewed Lazarus, which I'm sure they talked to. Today it's very popular to talk about these near-death experiences, right? Or to read about them, and they are really pretty interesting. But Lazarus, he wasn't near death; he was dead, right?
And that's interesting, because they might have. I would think they would have known about the widow of Nain and the Tabitha Kumi. I mean, that this has happened before, but there's something about he stinketh. There's 3 days that made it more final than. Looks like Jesus kind of got on the scene early enough to do it. I mean, this isn't the first time he raised the dead.
No, I think back then they believed that if you were dead 3 days, that you were dead, as opposed, I think the Jews believed your spirit kind of hung around a little bit.
You
So
stunk.
if you were dead a day or so, you weren't, you were dead, but 3 days, you were dead.
Yeah.
Right.
You stunk, like you said.
Interesting what John brings up, and you're right. I mean, the media would have been all over this. This is an amazing experience. The problem is, I'm sure CNN would have twisted it and messed it up somehow. So I don't know what kind
Well,
of story we would have actually got.
We're gonna see a twisting up of something wonderful right in the text. They didn't have the modern way of communication like we do today, but here's a man who's raised from the dead, been dead 4 days, and we're going to see a convoluted response to that occasion.
Right.
And that's amazing. That is absolutely amazing. Yeah.
So I think one of the takeaways as part of our journey is, do we have the peace, maybe that's a good word, that when we actually cross this threshold, that all is well?
All is not lost.
I don't think it's nice to have it. I don't think it matters. Jesus is control. I have the peace that he's going to do the right thing. And I have anxiety. My brain may go weird. A dozen things may go south on me. But right now, let's look forward to it. He's in charge, and it'll turn out well.
There's faith.
Yeah. I trust Jesus. I don't trust my faith. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Just you.
I got a question for you guys. Are you seeing this screen as a narrow window with 6 windows?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
So we'll talk about after we're done here, what might be done.
Well, actually, that's great. I get to see everybody. It's fine.
Well, fellas, it's 8 o'clock and we're going to sign off. I don't know how we're gonna stop the recording, but we'll figure that out.
Hey, Jeff, where are you today?
I'm in San Francisco.
Okay.
See, this is so cool. This works both ways.
Yeah.
So you're all invited to join us
Yeah,
again. We have coffee. Good.
Yep. At the Moot House. So we'll be here next week. And I guess we'll probably have one or two more times before Christmas, and we'll take a little break. But Bill and I will continue to be here unless we communicate that to you. And you're all invited to come as you can. And we'll be on Zoom next week, and we'll continue our journey in the technology challenges with the technology challenge. Have a good week, guys. We'll see you next time.
Yeah.
You as well.
Bye
Bob,
now.
great to see you. You're looking great, Bob.
Yeah, Bob, thanks for
Yeah,
joining.
Bob.
No,
So-
so you want to shut that down.
Well, I mean, can you move to a non-share? I mean, right, you started off sharing your presentation. If you don't share it, does this screen expand then for all the people?
I don't know.
That's
It,
what I-
it expanded to all people, and then we lost the screen.
right, but right now
Because
that's
the battery's dead.
because the battery's dead, but it's not, if he changes that, we should expand. Thank you. We're gonna sit you guys down now and try to deal with this.